Hi, this is the Gen X podcast. This is our first episode. We're calling it the pilot, right? Gen X podcast. I'm Evan.
And I'm Brady.
And like I said, this is our first show and we're calling it the pilot. And we just wanted you to feel what it's like to listen in to two Gen X guys talk. And we hope that as this is our pilot show, it doesn't disappear like Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, right? Like we don't want
Right.
that.
Yeah.
This, just so you know, if you don't know this already, Gen X people are people who were born between the years 1965 and 1980. Now, I won't give away our exact ages, but I'm near the beginning of those years, and Brady's kind of about two-thirds of the way in.
About two-thirds.
So that gives you a little bit of something to go on.
Yeah.
But I just a little bit of an intro. I'm married. I've been married for 22 plus years and have a son in high school. And we have three dogs. I'm originally from Iowa. And like I said, I was born at the beginning of the Gen X generation. It'll be interesting to see if between Brady and myself, if we have different takes on things based on where we are within the Gen X kind of years there. I'm kind of curious about that. But go ahead, Brady, introduce yourself as well.
Yeah. So I grew up in Michigan, and I've got uh, teenage twin girls. So lots of drama in our house. But yeah, I'm two-thirds of the way through Gen X, and yeah, this podcast came available. And shout out to Evan for putting all this together. A lot of work, hard work.
Ah, it's a
It's
podcast. How much work could it possibly be? We're just sitting here talking in our
right,
PJs.
right.
Actually, I'm representing. I just got back. My son plays high school soccer, so I just got back from his game. They have won their first two games of the year. I'm kind of excited about that. But um, so I'm representing his school with my things. I think Brady is representing uh, Scooby Doo this
Yeah,
year's
that's absolutely right. For those
industry.
that
And it
are,
only the greatest TV show ever made. And if you don't believe that, then you're definitely not a Gen X
that's
because
yeah, and that's
the
one of the things that a lot of people out there are very familiar with the baby boomers generation
yeah,
and
right.
very familiar with millennials, but our generation, that Gen X, kind of is the middle child. We're kind of the yeah, people might not really be that familiar with all the things that we've experienced growing up in that Gen X period.
Yeah,
Um,
we are not hippies. That is the baby boomers are your hippie generation, among other things.
right.
I like to think, now maybe we're a little biased. I like to think that Gen Xers are the last great generation that the country has ever had. Probably others might even agree because we're hardworking and we don't put up with crap.
Yeah.
We like people who speak their minds. We are fiercely independent. Um, we're we like rules, but only when they make sense. I think is something else. We're pretty much no nonsense.
Right.
Um, our conversation and this podcast is just about those things. It's viewing the world from the perspective of a couple of guys who grew up and are in the Gen X era, and we see the world differently than people do today, or are definitely different than our parents did. Um, so mostly it's an unscripted show of just us talking. We go out to eat, we talk for 3 hours. We find it really fascinating
Right.
and really interesting and quite funny. And we thought you might actually think so as well. But mostly it's just going to be an organic conversation. Like I said, we have a few segments that will drop in here and there. We will probably bob and weave a lot when it comes to different topics. Um, but we did want to say some ground rules up front, which is since we're Gen X, we're not PC. And honestly, we don't even care if you're offended. So that's a Gen X thing. We don't really care. It's like get over yourself, fall down, wipe it off, walk it off. That's it. We don't have tender sensitivities about things like that. And guess what? So if things do bother you or do offend you, there's this great way to avoid being offended. It's turning it off. So if you don't like it,
Turn it
turn it
off.
off.
Yeah.
But I will say it's mainly going to be PG.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't be worried about that. You can listen to it in the car with your family, um, that kind of a thing. You could listen to it at work, and you're not going to probably offend anybody too much. But anyway, so first up, hey, you got one more thing there, Brady?
Well, I was just going to say, going back to what you're saying about, the last of the greatest generations, I think there's definitely some truth to that, especially seeing the younger generations, and how things are unfolding. But, just speaking a little bit about your childhood and what that's like, because I think we were the last of the generations that had complete freedom.
Yeah,
You
and we're going to get into that quite a bit because I think that's something that defines the generation
Yeah,
is childhood freedom.
yeah,
And I think we'll have some interesting discussions about that. I did want to we'll start off kind of with again, this is Gen X guys' take on current events. Now, it's not super current because it was a couple of weeks ago, but there was a guy who was very popular among Gen X people in the 90s who just banked about $20 million for standing in a ring for what was it, 16 total minutes.
yeah,
Brady, we are in the wrong line of work. If 16 minutes worth gets you 20, I'd stand in the ring with Tyson for
yeah.
16 minutes for 20 million.
But now, yeah,
Just, protect. That's
yeah,
pretty much all I would do. But I found it fascinating as a cultural event. Like my high school son was really interested in it because he's probably more heard of more about Jake Paul than he has Mike Tyson. People from the Gen X generation, Mike Tyson, it's hard to over exaggerate how big of a cultural icon Mike Tyson is and was,
right, yeah,
right? I mean, he was just a unique individual person. And we, I found the fight was not much of a fight. The girls' fight before that was way better.
yeah. No, I hear you. Growing up, one of our friends, his dad was a sports writer. So he got all the fights on pay-per-view, everything. So we would always go over and see the Tyson fights. Because, I mean, you wouldn't just pony up the money for that because some of them were like 10 seconds long.
Yeah, exactly.
But so I got to see just about every one of his fights.
Yep.
And I'll just never forget, it was almost like a wild animal being released.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking of it, right?
And you
Just
could see
crazy.
you could see some of these guys that he faced were, that
They were
fear
scared.
was hard for
Yeah.
them to hide. And then just watching him on this recent fight, walking down, just didn't look like, that fight that's when you look somebody in the eyes and it just
Yeah.
didn't look like even a shadow of
No. And
Mike.
as I was thinking about it, it's like he's around my age. I won't say how close, but he's fairly close to my age.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, wow, it'd be amazing to get in that kind of shape when you're that age, because he
Yeah.
certainly was in great shape.
Yeah.
But I think as you get older in life, that you don't have that edge anymore, right? Life has kind of
Yeah.
flattens that stuff out. And I think Gen Xers are kind of in that phase too, where it's like we kind of don't care about a lot of stuff, but also maybe some of the edge that we had when we were younger. It, as that generation gets older and gets into their 50s and then into their 60s, that tends to kind of fade. I always find it fascinating that boomers were the anti-establishment, hippie, stick it to the man generation, and so many of them have completely flipped 180 degrees and now they're support the government, and the
Yeah.
government knows. It's like, what happened? I think they smoked too much pot when they were kids or something, because
Yeah.
it's like, what happened there? It's like, but Gen Xers, no, no, we're not having any of that, right? Like,
Yeah.
no, that independence part is a big deal. Now, another question: the college football poll, the rankings have come out. I was looking at it today. You're a Big Ten guy because you're a Michigan guy. I'm a Big 12 guy now times two. I live in the Phoenix area, so I have been a Sun Devil fan for 29 years or however long I've been here. But I went to Iowa State, and so they're my sentimental favorite as an alumni. Both of them are getting completely screwed. They're
Yeah.
10-2, and they're ranked 15th and 16th behind three lost teams who have bad losses.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I
Is it
don't get it.
is it
And I'm
Miami?
sorry that it's just, I'm sure it's a scab for you, Brady. I mean, you're happy that Michigan beat Ohio State and
Oh yeah.
proved that they didn't deserve their ranking, and yet they're still ranked sixth,
Yeah.
even though that's a bad home loss to a 6-6 team or whatever Michigan is,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that makes this
Um,
for sure. That beating Ohio State is kind of it's like U of A beating ASU, or if they were able to.
it's your only, if you're not having a perfect season, that's how you win your season,
That's it. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it used to be in the days, if Iowa State beat Iowa in the season, which they did this year, uh, that made your season, right?
Yeah.
You could be 2-10 and you were happy because you beat Iowa. And it's the same if Michigan beats Ohio State, you could be 1-11 in all your other games, but you beat Ohio State, right? That's all that matters.
Right. Jobs are probably saved because yeah.
Yeah, because that's the one that'll get you fired, right? Like everyone's calling for Ryan Day's head. I
Yeah.
saw a stat. He's 1-4 against Michigan, and he's 46-2 or something against everyone else in the Big Ten.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
that's just insane, right? And then they're calling for his head
Yeah.
because he's lost four times to Michigan, right? It's like the team loses like one game a year for the last 8 years. And, but if you lose to Michigan, you're a failure.
No, yeah. Yeah, that rivalry is it's
That's
real.
up there, right? That's one of the best.
Yeah.
The fact that both of them have 110,000 seat stadiums, right? It's like,
Yeah. They're definitely enemies for life, that's for sure.
I mean, I'm an underdog guy, so like the Boise States and the SMU of the world, I like seeing them there. I hope they win their conference championships and make it in, and I don't even mind if they get a bye. I
Right.
like to see teams that play well. This running back for Boise State, Genty, this guy is amazing. He might be the greatest running back in the history of college football when all is said and done, and he still may not win the Heisman because another guy has a lot of snaps in
Yeah.
Colorado, which is kind of a joke to me. But
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I love
so
the
it'll it
I'm so glad that we're not dealing with two teams, that we've got some expansion here to be able to really let those, but there's always going to be, I mean, Miami's on the outside looking in saying, what happened?
yeah.
Uh,
You got BYU, who's 10-2, and they're ranked 18th. It's like, are you kidding me? They beat SMU,
yeah.
right?
And
And
New
SMU is ranked what? They're like eighth, and the team that beat them is 18th.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah. Wherever
I
you line, those people that are by it are going to be,
so here's my plan. I posted this on X earlier this week. The Power Four conferences, the two teams that make the Power Four conference championships get automatic bids. So there's 8 teams. the teams that win the conference championship games get the buys, right? And then
Yeah.
you have four at-large teams, and deference is given to non-power five conference champions who have a decent strength of schedule and a unbeaten record or one-loss record,
Yeah.
right? That's where the SMUs or the Boise States or some of the other teams that are kind of on the fringe teams, Army, right? That's what Notre Dame would fall into this category, right? A non-conference team gets an at-large bid because they have a good record.
Yeah.
That's they're definitely going to need to do some tweaking. And one of the things that has to be figured out is like there was too many tiebreakers. Like this last weekend, it's like, oh, if Iowa State wins, they're in. Wait, no, they're not. If BYU loses to so and so, and it was exciting but too complicated,
Yeah.
right? And how Colorado was even still in the mix with three losses, with three two-loss teams, like that doesn't even make sense. Like,
And then
yeah,
you've
my
got,
son and I said, your overall record, regardless of strength of schedule, has got to be the top thing. And then there's other tiebreakers underneath that. But you can't have a team that's lost three wins be ahead of a team who's got two losses. That
right.
doesn't make sense to me, right?
I think the Alabama situation where they lose to
Yeah,
Van,
that's
lose to Oklahoma, bad, bad losses, and yet they're just stepping right in front of,
there's no way they should be anywhere sniffing the top 12,
yeah.
right? They have not looked like Alabama of old. Their
Yeah.
record is not Alabama of old. They don't deserve to be there. People will complain about that. I know you love Alabama, whatever. It's like, okay. And all this talk about the SEC. This is another thing that gets me. All this talk about, oh, the SEC is clearly better. Which SEC team won the national championship last year? Oh, that's right. They didn't.
Oh,
Michigan won,
right.
right? It's like, so there's that. And then you had a 14-0 Florida State from the ACC who didn't even make the Final Four,
Yeah.
right? Like, so, and they let in an SEC team instead. It's like at some point that favoritism has to die off. I
Yeah.
just feel like it's gonna have to, right?
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
Brady, before we go into the next segment, we're going to take a quick break here, but we will be right back. Hey, and welcome back to the Gen X Rewind Podcast. My name's Evan,
I'm Brady.
and we have a section called The Rewind. And this is an opportunity for us to ask three questions of each other, but neither of us knows what questions are going to be asked. They have been hidden. We have hidden them from each other, kind of like Karnak on Johnny Carson. I think I was going to explain earlier too, Brady. If you're not a Gen Xer, you may need, while you're watching the podcast, you may need to have Google open kind of on the side so that when we make a
Very good.
reference about Scooby Doo or Johnny Carson or something like that, I can see kids frantically typing away, who is
Right.
Johnny Carson, right?
You're right.
Uh, Only the greatest TV show host of all time.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
have three questions for Brady. The first one is, are you ready, Brady? Here we
Right.
go. What were Saturday mornings like for you when you were a kid, say 9 or 10 years old?
Yeah. So, like I said, very precious times when you're a kid. Saturday morning, we couldn't record TV shows or anything.
Wait,
So,
what? What?
yeah.
How you didn't just put it on the DVR and watch it
Yeah.
later?
Wouldn't that be wonderful? No, this was pre VHS tapes, even. So, you were
Yes.
pretty much stuck. Either you watched it, you got up and watched your favorite cartoons, or you didn't. You missed them.
Yeah.
So that's what I remember my brother and I doing is dragging ourselves out of bed so we could go watch our favorite cartoons. And then you'd get the biggest bowl of whatever sugar syrup talk your mom into buying. If she was broke down and bought it, you'd have this massive bowl of oh, we had so many different
Fruity Pebbles,
yeah,
Captain Crunch.
was it Tricks and Kicks
Count
or
Chocula.
Kicks was an 80s one, yeah.
Now, hey, I got a follow-up question for you. This does not count as one of the three questions. Were you allowed to put spoonfuls of sugar on your cereal? Say if
Oh,
you were eating a non-sugared cereal or a less sugared cereal like a grape nuts or a Kix or something, were you allowed to put scoop
we
tablespoons of sugar on it?
yeah, we actually had powdered sugar for that occasion.
Oh, wow.
So we would do a good, yes, dashing of powdered sugar all over. If you were out of all the good stuff, and you had to choke down something that wasn't loaded with sugar and chemicals and varnish. Yeah, but no, we would do that. We'd get up, and you'd have Flintstones, and you had your, of course, a lot of the superhero ones, which were big when we were
Super
boys.
Friends, right?
Super Friends, that was a big one. Yeah, we would definitely want to catch those and just veg for a few hours. That's pretty much what our Saturdays were like. Um, yeah,
So
TV.
this is where I would say it's like, so even though we're separated within the Gen X generational age group, that's my exact same experience, right? It
Yeah,
was get up, fix myself a gigantic bowl. Probably on Saturday mornings, I was eating peanut butter crunch. And of course, I'd fill the bowl right to the top with peanut butter crunch and then pour the milk in, and half of them would splash out onto
yeah.
the ground. That was that's what would normally happen. And then that's what you have a dog for, right? Because the dog then, man,
Yep.
let me tell you, if you're a dog owner and you want to train your pets, I'm sure sugar is not good for them, but boy, do they like peanut butter crunch
Oh,
cereal. They really like it. So you
oh,
could teach your dog just about anything. Plus, they'll bounce off the walls for the next 6 hours too. All
yeah.
right, question number two kind of follows along with the first question, but what kind of a TV did you have? Say you're 8, 9 years old. What kind of a TV did you have?
Oh man. So
80-inch LED? No.
no, no, we had our first one was a dial. We had the dial, the CRT, the tube, the 700 pound
Yeah, it's like
TV. Yeah,
had more glass in it than the Crystal Cathedral, right? It's like,
we had one of those, and yeah, you had to get up and physically turn the dial, and then sit down. And then when a commercial came, you jumped up and turned the dial. Uh, so yeah, that's pretty much what we had. Then after a few years, we ended up evolving to the next, which it wasn't a dial, it was like a touch button. So
uh-huh.
and the thing with that is you got really skilled with holding your hand and just going 02, 03, 04, 05, 06, and watching the TV as you rapidly flip through.
Oh, yeah.
We would do that, and
How many channels did you have? Did you have cable TV?
we did, yeah. But I think we had, I'd probably guess around 30 something
And I
channels.
think, and that's where the difference starts to show. Because when I was a kid, until I was at least in junior high, we didn't have cable TV. So we had four channels, I
Yeah,
think, at the time, maybe five. We had ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, where you'd watch Sesame Street, and
right.
then maybe an independent channel, right?
Okay.
And that showed like reruns right after school, right? The independent channel was
Yeah,
always good for the after school reruns.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, we had the same thing. We had a dial TV, clunky dial. I think it was
yeah.
like actually my first TV that we had when I was a kid was black and white, and it was like an 11-inch portable. Literally,
Wow.
that was the TV.
Yeah.
So it was like, hey, let's watch something on TV. My dad would just get it, fix the rabbit ears, set
Right.
it on the ground in the living room, and we would like sit on the couch and look at this literally like an 11-inch black and white screen watching, Hogan's Heroes
Oh yeah.
and Gilligan's Island,
Oh yeah.
uh, right? And so I was the remote control. My dad would just poke me to
Yeah, right.
flick it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
That was the thing is, you would come down to bartering with everyone else in the room,
yeah, it's like who's gonna change the
turn,
channel?
their turn. Then you'd have to call your
That's right.
chair. Hey, this is my chair. Whenever you got up and went in the kitchen, and
But
uh,
and the amazing thing you mentioned it is like if you weren't up at 6 o'clock to watch Scooby Doo or whatever it is you're gonna watch, that was it. You missed it.
that's it. Yeah, it,
Right. So if you slept in late, then you missed those cartoons and they weren't on until the next week. And you may miss that one until 9 months when maybe it's in reruns, right? Over
yeah,
the summer or whatever.
yeah,
But if something was on, if MASH was on at night or Carol Burnett show or Happy Days or whatever, you had to be sitting in front of your TV when it started. There was no other option. And the only way to catch one that you missed was to hopefully see it in a rerun over the summer
yeah. No,
or
that
something. And you didn't want to be the kid at school that didn't see the episode of Happy Days where Fonzie jumped a shark or whatever it is, because you needed to talk about that,
right.
right?
The
In
water cooler.
school. You did not want to miss those types of events. All right, question number 3. What's the first video game that you ever remember playing?
Oh boy. That would have still been Space Invaders
Okay.
for me.
At an arcade?
So, no, well, so here's what I remember. But we would take in the summertime, we'd take road trips. And so we'd have to spend the night at the cheapest hotel that
Yeah.
along,
Motel 6, Super
yeah,
8s.
exactly, right
Yeah.
off the,
Yeah,
uh,
right off the highway.
in some of those, my dad loved Space Invaders. So if we stopped at one and they'd usually have a little room with maybe two or, three games and Space Invaders was in there, then all of a sudden, we were in there playing. So that was the first game. And I actually in college bought the game, the actual arcade, full-size arcade, and had it uh, in my uh, in my apartment there at college, and my roommate had the Centipede, that
Oh,
game,
nice.
so we could yeah mess around and go for the high score on each other's games, and yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, I think we got the original Pong
Oh yeah,
game in like 1975, I think it was, or whenever it was. You can check
yeah,
me on that, but I feel like it was maybe around 1975.
yeah.
And we got a Pong game, and it had, 3 modes. It had novice, pro, and expert, or something like that. And it just meant that the little Pong ball would go faster, right?
Yeah,
That's all that meant. And
yeah.
then 2 paddles that just spin your thing back and forth. And it's funny because thinking about it now and just how silly it is, and yet we spent hours
Oh yeah.
playing that game, like hours playing that game.
Uh,
And
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
then I never got another console then until I was an adult. I had Mattel Electronic Football, but I'd never had another console until later as an adult. But I would go to an arcade and I'd play Joust
Oh yeah,
and Donkey Kong and
yeah.
Robotron,
Oh yeah,
Tempest,
yeah.
Pac-Man. Those were the main
So many,
games.
so many good ones. Yeah, yeah, I remember, as far as the first console goes, I remember, it's kind of funny. After school, it probably would have been fourth grade, around that time frame. My brother and I were at an after school event, some dinner, uh, banquet probably for sports. And I remember my dad, it was around Christmas time, and my dad said, well, we got an Intellivision for Chris. And before he
Nice.
say for Chris, my brother and I were like, oh my.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the reaction was such to the point where my dad had said, hey, shh, hey,
Yeah,
quiet,
calm
quiet,
down.
we're getting, but I'll tell you, from that Intellivision, before Atari, before
Yep.
Nintendo, before all those came out, all it was a disc on a plate, with two buttons on the sides. But the games, Pitfall and Asteroids, and you could spend hours and
Oh
hours
yeah, easily.
just,
It was, and we are the first generation to go from not having video games to having video games.
yeah,
And so, in one sense, we're the only generation that will ever experience we didn't have video games and then we had video games, right?
right.
Because when I was a younger kid, there was no such thing as video games. And really, Pong was a glorified computer program, right? I wouldn't even call it a video game per se. The real stuff started with Pac-Man and
Yeah,
Asteroids. Those were, I'd call them first gen video games that actually had arcade style games and
right.
gameplay and everything.
Yeah.
But to go from, not having anything like that, Oregon Trails,
Oh, yeah.
that was just, I heard that's coming back. I heard they're going to try to make like a PS5 version of that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Some of these old games have stood the test of time. It really is, when you see, even when you play an arcade and you play in Space Invaders and you hear the music going, and it sucks you in. And even I think, even my kids playing some of these old games are, it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of refreshing.
It is refreshing. All right, now we will switch to what questions you have for me.
It's funny you mentioned Saturday morning because it's such a sacred time as a Gen X
Yeah.
kid. The first two
Yeah.
questions I put down were, what was your favorite Saturday cartoon?
Oh, that's hilarious, right? Like, so Scooby-Doo was my favorite cartoon. And I think if you look it up too, the actual show started when I was maybe like 2 years old.
Yeah,
So I was thinking of that the other day. I was watching some of those Rankin Bass Christmas shows, right? They all started right about the time I was born. So I've never had a Christmas without Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer
wow,
or Santa
yeah,
Claus is Coming to Town, Frosted Snowman. Literally every Christmas of my entire life, I have
yeah,
watched those shows.
yeah,
Scooby-Doo was my favorite, and I've seen like all the iterations of it. I watched, what was it, maybe 10 years ago, I watched Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, which I think was on Netflix at the time.
yeah,
And I watched it with my son when he was like 4 or 5 years old. And that was a great version of
yeah.
Scooby-Doo. It was the best animation, I think,
Hmm.
and quality. But definitely that was my favorite. I love dogs. Scooby-Doo's awesome. Casey Kasem as Shaggy, which is
Oh yeah,
funny, right? Because he was doing America's Top 40 and then he was Shaggy. It's
yeah.
like that's such a random thing. The interesting thing for those of you who may not know, the voice of Fred and the voice of Scooby-Doo since day one have been voiced by a voice actor called Frank Welker.
Hmm.
So he has been doing that character for 58 years or
Wow.
something to that effect, right? So done it from the start. He's done it for everything. Um, dude's got to be what? He's got to be 80, right? He's
What
probably got to be 80.
what an amazing job. Can you imagine if that
Can you
was
imagine
your
60 years of doing Scooby-Doo? Like how awesome would that be, right? That's like the ultimate job. He gets to be
oh man.
Fred and then Scooby-Doo for all these years. Now all the other voice actors have like switched over, right?
Yeah.
Casey Kasem left early 2000s, I think, and he sadly passed away a few years ago. But um, and all of the other voice actors have changed, but Frank Welker has kept that job. He's like the voices on The Simpsons, right? They've been doing that for 36
Oh,
years, and
that's
they're like all those voice actors are like 70
yeah.
now. It's like
Oh
it's like the
man.
best. And I don't know if you've ever seen. they had the outtakes, Family Guy and Simpsons and everything. If you've ever seen what a voice actor does, they don't interact with the other voice actors. They come in, they have their script, and they just say their lines. It takes them like 5 minutes if they're
Wow.
professional, and then they leave and get a big fat check.
Yeah.
Right. So they come in and say, "Oh, hi, honey, I'm home." Next line, "What's for dinner?" Right. Like that's all they do. They just, and they're not even interacting with other actors. They're just saying their lines and it all gets pieced together
Yeah.
at the end. Now, this blog is live. Well, not live, it's recorded, but we're recording it live like they used to do on TV, which they used to say it was recorded in front of a live studio audience, right? And you could always tell that via the versus the laugh track shows, right? It was always more energy. All right, second question.
Second question, same, and this is adds to it. Favorite breakfast cereals, what I have down here. What do
So
you remember? Of course, you
that's
already,
so funny. Yeah, peanut butter crunch.
yeah. It just shows you
Uh
how serious that
yeah,
time
I mean
was.
it, and how like I can still taste that bowl of peanut
Oh,
butter crunch. I can still
yeah,
taste it, right? And
yeah.
it was very sweet. I'm sure it had a gazillion uh calories and
Oh,
milligrams of sugar, like 50 heaping teaspoons per bowl. Somehow I still have my original teeth
yeah.
in my mouth after eating all of that, because I sure didn't brush my teeth on a Saturday morning, right? It wasn't that was
Yeah, no
that for
nutritional value
no,
whatsoever.
there was zero. I'm sure there was zero nutritional value in any of that. That was my go-to, and there was almost
Yeah.
always a box of that, I think, in the house. I liked Captain Crunch, Crunch Berries, um, and some of those other ones, but I stopped being a breakfast person like in junior high, because it was just I couldn't get ready in time and
Uh,
then make myself
yeah.
breakfast and stuff. So I just kind of stopped eating breakfast.
Yeah.
But definitely peanut butter crunch was, and probably if I were to eat cereal nowadays, it would probably still be my favorite cereal. So
That's good stuff. Yeah, the other thing is a lot of people probably don't realize this with Gen X, but uh, we couldn't just go and put Apple music on and listen to whatever music
no,
you you had to you had to have your cassette tape by the radio ready to record and or push your record and play as it came on the radio and
yeah.
record. So that was the other question is, as far as your favorite, your mixtape, what were some of the songs on your mixtape?
I didn't get to make any mixtapes or any music recordings until I was probably 12 or 13, I think. Up until
Yeah,
that point, we just had albums. And for those who are less than Gen X, these are big black CDs. That's what they're making a comeback. I mean, they literally are making a comeback. And there's something to the sound of that, because it's an
right.
analog sound. It has a richer quality to it than sometimes than even high quality digital recordings. The problem was that the needles would scratch it, and so when you listen to your album a million times, it started to skip and everything else. So that was frustrating. But when I got my first tape recorder, I think I was 12. And
Mm,
yes, I got a little microphone that plugged into the jack and would set it right in front of the speaker on my
yeah.
clock radio. And then you hated it when the dumb DJ would talk over the beginning of the song
Uh,
and then
yeah,
interrupt the song at the end, because it's like that kind of spoiled your recording.
yeah,
So literally, I remember people calling into radio. This is another thing that people did. You wanted to hear a certain song, there was no way to hear it unless you had the album or the tape. So you
right.
would call into the radio station and ask the DJ to play, you know, whatever it was, Afternoon Delight, whatever the song was that you wanted to hear. And then, like, I remember people saying, "Could you please not talk over it? Because I'm going to try to record it."
Yeah.
And they would do dedications for girlfriends and boyfriends and stuff, just like American Top 40 would do. And you just hope that they didn't talk over it if you were making a
Yeah.
tape of your favorites. And to this day, I still have tapes from when I was in junior high and high school that I recorded off the radio. I still have some. Like they're
Yeah.
squirreled away somewhere in the garage, right? But
Yeah.
they're actual cassette tapes with recordings off of a radio from when I
Yeah.
was a kid. And
And
I actually cataloged them at one point, like wrote down where on the tape at the tape counter
yeah.
328, starts cooling the gang.
Yeah.
It's like that was how you did it, right? Uh
No,
the
definitely remember, cutting the grass with my mixtape and those, the headphones
ear
with the fun,
headphones. Yeah.
the earphones, and you want to skip a song, you gotta
Fast
stop
forward
and
for 10 seconds, right? Yeah. 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 It's like, look at I mean, when the Walkmans came out, that was a revolutionary thing that you could just
yeah,
take your music with you, right? Like prior
right,
to that, there really was no way to do that. We had transistor radios, which I don't know if people know what those are, but it was an AM, usually AM, could be AM, FM, the antenna that you pulled up
yeah,
and it was about this big and you would hold it up to your ear and you could get the little ear plug, right? There's some of them just the ear plug.
yeah,
And so I would put that in my pocket and then ride my bike and listen to the radio with the
yeah,
earplug in, right? That
yeah.
was how we did
It
it.
it really is amazing to think of the technology that our Gen X group has experienced from way back to the black and white TV.
Yeah, almost nothing till where we are now. It's like it's
Yeah,
really incredible that we don't have future shock
yeah,
because of all of the stuff that has happened just in our lifetimes. And
yeah.
I used to think, hey, a lot of stuff happened in my mom's lifetime. There was they had cars and airplanes, but they didn't have radios and TVs. And then they got radios and then they got TVs. And that, it was like, but no one was flying, right?
No,
There weren't people, there wasn't like really touristy airlines and stuff. That didn't really start to happen until the 70s for the
yeah,
most part.
yeah. But
So,
to have the birth of computers
yeah, that's the thing, the birth of the computer,
uh,
right?
in
And I
our
mean, I've argued this with my son. We're like, what's the greatest invention in the history of mankind? And, it's like people are like, well, the wheel and stuff. And then if I say computers, he says, but you had to have electricity. So I'm like, yep, I think electricity is the number one invention of all time. And then computers is right behind it, right? Because
yeah,
what do you have in your house that isn't connected to a computer in some way? Like virtually everything is connected to a computer and they all have to have electricity or batteries. So it's like
right.
those are one and two.
Indoor plumbing is definitely high on that.
That's probably a good one. And I know my dad's first house, he told me stories about they had an outhouse when
Yeah,
we're not that far removed from having outhouses. And I
yeah,
know that you're going to have to Google that because people won't know what that is. But it's
yeah,
like literally you didn't have indoor plumbing. So, or a refrigerator was another one,
yeah. And in the
which is,
in
well, yeah,
Iowa,
it's where
yeah,
the ice box comes from because literally there was a box outside your kitchen window that you'd set out in the winter and then you'd put ice cream and stuff in it and you could actually keep it for a few days. It
mm,
was just a box that was sitting outside in
yeah,
the cold, right? In Minnesota that worked. I don't know how that would have worked in Arizona.
yeah.
Uh, there wouldn't be a lot of coldness out there.
No. Well,
So, all right. So we got through our three questions. In fact, I even had a background that I forgot to use for that. So it's like this is why it's a pilot show,
that's
right?
right.
All right. The next segment is the get off my lawn. We actually talked about this quite a bit prior to the show because we even thought of using it as the title of the show, the Get
Yeah,
Off My Lawn. And then Brady suggested that people might think it's either a golf instructional podcast or a lawn keeping
right.
yard work podcast. And let me tell you, for both of us, yard work is a everyday
It's
thing that we do. So we could do a podcast on how to trim bougainvillea in your backyard because it's the bane of our existence.
Oh man. Yeah.
But for the purposes of this podcast, the Gen X Rewind, the Get Off My Lawn segment is essentially our opportunity to talk about a pet peeve, generally speaking, something, the difference between when we were younger and things now, because we have a lot of pet peeves
Yeah.
and a lot of things have changed, like we've talked about. My biggest pet peeve, I think, one of mine is recess at schools. And you think, how is that a pet peeve? Okay, so let me give you a story about when I was a kid. Recess, first of all, recess was like an hour. Like lunch and recess was literally like an hour from like 12 until 1.
Mm.
And nowadays, I think kids get like 15 minutes to eat and
Yeah.
then recess, right, for 2 seconds to go to the bathroom or something. It's like, I don't know, that bugs me in and of itself. Like, you need a break in the day, whatever. Um, so then we would run outside. There was no walking. We would run outside in a mad panic, screaming like kids coming out of school, and play on all sorts of equipment that was like you could live or die on this equipment.
Right.
Like, and we had swings, and that, but we had like a tether ball. We had we called them jungle gyms, which was a metal ladder type structure that was probably 15 or 20 feet high, and you just climbed on it. And will occasionally fall off on it. And what's funny is like now every playground has that rubber surface or it has wood chips or
Yeah.
something right underneath it.
Yeah.
Mine had concrete,
That's right.
literally a jungle gyms that you climbed on, and then there was cement underneath it. So if you fell, that you were getting hurt, right?
Yeah.
But
And
that's how you learn. Yeah,
our,
everybody's got a scar, like right here from our generation, like everyone,
the monkey
because you
star. I think
you
they.
hit your chin on the ground when you
Yeah.
fell off of jungle gyms. We had
Right.
the wheel of death. I don't know what they call that thing, but you run and you push the bars and then everybody jumps on.
Yeah.
And then you get it going so fast that
Yeah.
kids like just fly off in every direction. And
Right.
then you laugh and you get up and you do it again. But I think like what I learned from all that is like you learned a little bit of safety
Right.
because everything wasn't padded.
Yeah.
And I better hold on tight because if I fall, I'm going to crack my skull open. And of course, every fourth grader had a story about some kid at another school who cracked his head open and his brains were all over the place and blah, blah, blah. I mean, everybody had a story like that, right? Like everybody. And but I'll tell you the saddest day, and this is where the pet peeve come in. That happened. I'm sure somewhere some kid fell off a jungle gym and hurt himself or was paralyzed or whatever, right?
Yeah.
We arrived at school one day. Guess what was gone? The jungle gyms overnight had been dismantled and taken
Yeah.
away.
You're right.
And it was like, it's like diving boards at motels, right? It's like everyone had one and then all of a sudden they're all gone
Right. Yeah.
because, you can't trust people. They're going to hurt themselves. And it's like, that's ultimately my pet peeve is that we've become this generation now of people who everything has to be padded.
Hmm.
Everything has to have a warning label on it. Do you remember warning labels when you were a kid? There wasn't a warning label on anything.
No. Uh-uh. Yeah.
You didn't wear helmets on your bike. I mean, knee pads and gloves, nothing. There was nothing. And
Right.
you learned how to use judgment, right, on when to push the envelope and when not to, because you could actually get hurt.
Right.
And I don't think that like kids today know as much about getting hurt because everything's padded and helmets and everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look at the hockey players back in our day wearing,
No, man, they didn't even have helmets,
and
much
skin.
less face shields.
Yeah.
Literally, I was a Minnesota North Stars fan when I was a kid. You were probably a Detroit Red Wing fan,
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah.
So the North Stars, and this was early 70s, had a goalkeeper named Gump Worsley. he was the goalkeeper. He did not wear a mask or a helmet. Can you imagine?
His teeth.
A goalkeeper was not, and then they made a rule that you had to have a mask with you. So he would skate out with the mask and set it on the back of the net because he wasn't going to wear it. And they grandfathered him in. It's like the guys like Gordie Howe and stuff who didn't wear helmets. They got grandfathered in. They didn't have to wear helmets, right?
Yeah.
So there
Yeah.
was players who didn't wear helmets and there was goalkeepers who didn't wear helmets, which is like that's hard to even comprehend today. But it just shows you like that was our expectation as kids. Like there weren't helmets and you learned how to be careful to a certain degree. Did you get hurt? Yep, everybody did. Probably every kid had a concussion without knowing it at some point in time,
Yeah.
right? And skinned knees and elbows. There was no elbow pads.
Yeah.
Um, I think most of us probably got the wind knocked out of us
Oh,
and were probably knocked unconscious at least once when we were a kid.
yeah. And going back to what you were saying about recess, and there's a toughness that comes from
Yeah.
getting knocked down and all that. But then you also bullies, deal
Yep.
with bullies at recess and all that stuff. I think it adds a layer of development for how you deal with adversity, how
It
you,
does.
you know, communicate, how you endure, how all those lessons you learn the hard way, but yet they're still learned. Whereas today, I think that's, everything's policed top to
Yeah.
bottom.
And you have to say, I try to tell my son, like, hey, don't do this and don't do that. Because when I was a kid, I didn't know enough to not do it and
Yeah,
hurt myself or whatever it might be. Right. But I think it's harder to really acquire that lesson when you don't learn it firsthand. Right.
right,
Falling
right.
off a bike, getting hit in the head with a hockey puck, um, getting knocked down and scraping your knee and just having to live with it until school is over, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't
And
even
you,
remember ever going to a nurse or anything. It's like,
right. And you learn not to mouth off and be
yeah,
disrespectful, rude to, people that were bigger than you because you would
they
probably,
might hit you.
right.
like, right? Like,
Now,
and there's value to that, right? It's like I read a post on X, like I think we should bring back bullying and the threat of violence because when we were kids, that served a purpose,
yeah,
right? Sometimes respect, um, sometimes knowing when to say something and when, knowing how to hold your tongue,
yeah,
um, knowing not to speak back to your parents.
right,
And you would know that you were pushing that limit if you did.
right,
Um, Things
well,
like that. I mean, I think it's what makes Gen X ultimately tougher than the generations that have come after us
right,
because we learned a lot of life lessons just in
absolutely,
everyday living, and a
yeah,
lot of them were hard and sometimes it was bad. But it's interesting if you listen to people, even when they talk about like really bad things from their childhood, it's very fascinating to hear. I watched a documentary the other day. I don't remember exactly what the name of it was, but it was people in a city in Iowa or Minnesota, and it was in the 70s, and there was a town bully and a bunch of different stuff. But listening to those people talk, it was interesting because even though bad things happen to them, they don't speak about it from a victim standpoint,
mm,
right? Which is what you get today. Everybody's a victim for every single thing,
right,
right? Um, but these people were abused and mistreated and bullied and think bad things happened to them. But it's very fascinating to listen to how they speak about it. Yeah, it was tough, but what are you going to do? You get through it. No big deal. This
yeah,
is how they talked about it, right? They learned to manage those difficulties, even if they were really bad. You stood up to them and you weren't a victim of those circumstances, right?
right, yeah, yeah, that's true. And
Which is very different.
in our generation too, a teacher could take you by the ear and
Yeah.
pull you your chair and walk you down to the office. Or, another example is just the use of foul language. Let's call it that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's become something that's so accepted in our society that, that sticks out to me as something that was very, very different. In that if you're dropping the F bomb in public and there's kids around, and there's an adult, they're probably gonna call you on it and
Yeah.
say, "Hey, where's your parents? You don't,
Yeah. That's
uh,
yeah.
you don't, and a total stranger, I would
Yeah.
anticipate saying something to me if I did that. Whereas now, you can pretty much, if you go to the gym, if you go skiing and you're on the slopes, you go wherever you go, you got people who are just using all this
Yeah.
language,
And everybody's afraid to say anything to them,
and there's
right?
kids around and everything,
Yeah.
and yet
Nobody's going to correct them.
you're the bad guy if you say anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, that
Yeah.
that
Everybody's parent was your parent when we were kids,
right,
right?
right,
So, and I think there was kind of an unwritten rule that you could tell somebody else's kids to shut their traps, right?
right,
Like that was an okay thing to do. And, if you were going over to a friend's house and your parents knew their parents, they would say, you have my permission to tell them to shut up, right?
yeah,
Like, and if they're bothering you, just, tell them to shut up, right?
yeah,
And I don't think people do that now. Um, but it was good because it goes back to what you're saying. It taught us manners and respect.
right,
And even though sometimes it may have been tough, what it also did is I don't think that we had fragile egos, right?
right,
Like that you could be so crushed. Like you and I both know, and we've talked about it, and I don't know if we can get away with saying it on the podcast, but there were certain words as 10-year-old boys that we called our best friends every day, all day long, multiple times. And when your best friend is calling you this word multiple times a day, you have a thick skin and it doesn't even mean anything. It's
right.
just what you do, it's what you say. But you build up a tolerance to people even trying to intentionally offend you. You build up a tolerance to that where it doesn't bother you anymore. It just rolls off. And most Gen X people, like, if we get called names, okay,
Yeah,
like who cares? Like that doesn't like what okay, whatever. Like it doesn't bother us at all. I always would tell people in my office, you can call me anything, you can say anything to me. You can't offend me. I'm Gen X. I cannot be offended. So don't worry. Don't apologize. If you say something like, I don't care, I'm not offended by that. Now, whether that's business appropriate or not, that's another question, but you're
yeah,
not going to offend me. I have a thicker skin. And I remember working with, 20 somethings, and somebody would say the slightest little backhanded something in a meeting, and they would like spiral out of control. That so and so said this, and I'm like, so?
yeah,
Like what difference does it make? It's like, who cares what they said? Well, but that hurt my feelings. It's like,
yeah.
oh, geez.
I know, I
Yeah,
know.
that's called life, right?
Yeah,
And I feel like with recent political events, we may be able to have true free speech again in terms of being able to say things that we want to say and
yeah,
not worry as much about everybody in the world being offended by every single thing that everyone says. It's
right.
way out of control, right?
Yeah, no, that's what America's all about, and yeah,
Did
it's
you have a get off my lawn pet peeve as well?
I definitely. A couple quick things. These are more quick, but tying in with just how society seems to be moving in a direction of not really caring about anyone else around them. As long as you kind of do your own thing, and if you step on other people's feet or toes, uh, you know, that's not a big deal. And My pet peeve is when it puts you in a position of, if you do speak up, if you say something, you're the bad guy.
Yeah, exactly.
So an example is, now it's nice weather, so I want to have my windows open, let the fresh, the AC's
Yes.
4 months, got to have
Yep.
fresh air in. And so, I open the windows, and the next door neighbor has got a bonfire going with smoke, and it's
Fills
just
your house with smoke. Yep.
so I have to close the windows. Well, next day, same thing. Next day, same thing. So this is happening every night, like around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. I don't even know if that's legal to be
What
having.
is he doing? Like, what are you doing
I,
having a fire every night?
good question, but I just want to be able to have my windows open. And
Yeah.
I'm in a position now where, do I go next door and knock on the door and say,
Yeah.
"Excuse me, can you not have a bonfire? I'd like to have my windows open." Or do you contact the HOA and say, uh, next door neighbors having a bonfire.
Right.
It's against the,
Or get a giant fan that blows all the smoke back into his yard. That's my solution.
yeah, but I just think back in when I was a kid, I think people would tend to look out for
Yeah, way more. Way
other
more.
people's.
Is that bothering you? Let me turn it
Yeah,
down. And we live in an area where everybody has block fences, right? Now I know this isn't standard. We live in Arizona, and the 6 foot tall block fences are everywhere. So it's easier to kind of not worry about the neighbors either. When we lived in the Midwest, there was not even barriers between one
no,
yard and the other.
no.
Your yard ran into the backyard of the next guy. And if they were out having a picnic with their family, you'd be in your backyard. You'd be like, "Hey, how's it going?"
Yeah,
Right?
that's the thing. It might be a Midwest thing, but it might be more of a Gen X thing too, where you knew your neighbors, and
Yeah.
you'd chat with them, you'd wave to them, you'd talk to them, which was nice open communication, because if one happened to be doing something that, you could just tell them, hey,
Yeah.
can you guys just maybe move that to some other time rather than. But nowadays, I mean, you don't even really know who your neighbors are. You've got big fences, and
You
which,
got automatic garage door openers, which we didn't have when I was really young kid. So you had to get out and open up the garage door by hand. So it's like, I know no one can even comprehend that that was ever a thing, but let me tell you, that was a thing,
yeah,
right? Like, and guess what? As the kid, that's my job. I got to get out when it's 40 below in Minnesota and open up the garage door, right? And then wait for the car to come in and then close it manually.
yeah,
And you had to walk down to the end of your driveway to get the mail. So you'd see
right,
the neighbor.
yep,
That's something that doesn't happen really much anymore. They're in a big cluster box, and
right,
it's not the
right.
same. I don't know why. It just isn't the same.
Chat for a while. It is strange. We've become a society that is so kind of reclusive. And going way back to when we were talking about, when you wanted to watch a TV program, you had to be there. I remember Cosby Thursday night. Our family would watch that every Thursday. That was like a big deal. We make
Oh, it was
sure
a big deal. It was a
we
big deal. It's like, and it's hard to explain it now because I was telling someone the other day. It's like Cosby was at the peak of its popularity when I was in college,
yeah,
and so the entire dorm would fill the TV room to watch Cosby.
yeah,
And then about half would leave for the next show. And by the time you got to the end of the night, most of the people had left. But like 300 kids were sitting in a TV lounge, climbing all over each other, stacking chairs and couches and stuff on top of each other so everybody could see the 20-inch TV
right.
watching Cosby. It was an event,
And that's
right?
that's the thing. Yet another thing that brought people together.
Yeah, he did.
Had
Because
to-
now it's like if you said that, like it's the same thing. It's like, hey, did you see the Tyson and Paul fight. It's like, oh yeah, I got to stream that tomorrow when I get home from work. Right? It's not the same,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
It's like because Netflix screwed it up anyway. Nobody could watch live, so it kind of blew that experience. So it's like, you're watching it later or whatever, but there was reasons to get together and to do things
Right.
and I think part of it too is just you could be more comfortable around people because you didn't have to talk politics and
Right.
people weren't so diametrically opposed as we are now. It's so polemic in terms of politics.
Yeah.
Um, you you weren't easily offended, so you weren't worried about what you were going to say to the neighbor to offend them and yada yada yada. Well, it just wasn't like that, right? That was something you could interact with strangers a lot more. You could interact with neighbors and stuff a lot more, and there were reasons to, and you'd even have people come over to watch TV shows and sporting events and like
Yeah.
that's really the only thing now is like even sporting events though it's like I tend to record them or watch them from behind so I can skip commercials and skip the
Absolutely.
halftime. It's just like I don't want to be sitting there watching TV commercials for 3 hours.
Yeah. I mean, we've traded convenience for
Yeah.
that. What we've given up is definitely there's some important things that
Community stuff that have gone away. Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. And I have another friend who's a good Gen X guy, and we were talking, we're from Iowa, and we said life changed. I think it was 1982 when Johnny Gosh was kidnapped. So he was this 12-year-old paper boy, lived in West Des Moines, Iowa, one of the safest places and communities probably anywhere in the country at that time. It probably still is. Iowa's a pretty safe place. Paper boy, and he was abducted and they didn't never found him. It was this ongoing story. And then another paper boy, like a couple years later, was abducted too. Prior to that, there were no restrictions on leaving your house or riding your bike or being out uh, with friends. Uh, there was no cell phones. Nobody knew where you were. You left your doors unlocked of your house and your car.
Right.
It was completely different. And after that, things changed. Parents started to have more rules. There was more fear. There was
Yeah.
locking. People started locking their bikes up and locking their doors and having more supervision. And there weren't as many paper boys anymore. It was adults driving cars around and stuff. And it
Right.
it was kind of to me it was kind of that was at least in Iowa that was sort of the death of that freedom
Right.
started to fade right
Yeah.
about then and when you felt like you couldn't trust other people and stuff it just everybody's started to go inward and started to be protectionist about everything
Right.
and you lose this is the thing that people don't understand is you lose freedom
Absolutely. Yeah.
in that situation. So anytime the government or anybody talks about fear, whatever it is, a disease or Russia or whatever it is, be mindful that fear is there to control you and to cause you to that fear then makes you easy to control, right?
Yeah.
When somebody lives in fear, they're easier to control because they will do whatever it takes to be safe,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Or and I'm safe, right? It's like um that was not something that we experienced back then when I was a kid was that kind of
Oh, I don't
stuff.
think
There was far less of that.
generation that, you could just after your Saturday morning cartoons, jump on your bike, ride to your friend's house,
You
go
were
to the
gone all day.
gate, you're gone, you're riding for miles. That's the other thing too that we should probably address is, you and I, your bike was your transportation.
Yeah.
You would ride it for miles and miles and miles. You would climb trees. You would, walk and walk and walk. And, you go to the arcade and you do all these things. And you just think of the amount of activity
Yeah.
and, and exercise that you just inadvertently
Yeah.
did.
I
as
mean,
a
riding a huffy bike that doesn't have any speeds to it for 10 miles is a workout, let me tell you, right?
yeah.
Like
Oh
with
yeah.
coaster brakes on top of it, right? It's like that was what I mean, that was a Saturday or even after school or in the summer. It was like you just take your bike and you'd be gone all day.
Yeah.
Parents didn't know. And they had a saying, and I'll say it at the end of the show here. They had a saying for us, but parents didn't know where you were, uh, didn't really care. Now they'll probably say, "Oh, yes, we did care," but blah blah blah. It's like
Yeah.
you didn't even really have to ask to go anywhere. It was just
Oh,
like you'd scream something as you were running out of the house grabbing your bike, right?
yeah. You had one rule, and that one rule was be home in time for dinner. It
Yeah,
was,
that was it.
it
That was
was
it. That was the only rule. If you
yeah,
left at 8 a.m., same rule. If you left at 3 p.m., same rule. Didn't matter.
be home, and you could go anywhere. You could ride. We used to do, and this is another layer of a benefit, was we were very resourceful. We would actually ride our
Yeah.
bike to the tennis house. We'd fill up bags full of cans, take them to the grocery store. You got 10 cents a can in Michigan.
Yeah.
So back then in the 80s, that's decent
Yeah.
money.
You could buy gum and Bubblicious and you could
A big league chew.
candy cigarettes and whatever.
Yeah. But then you take that to the arcade, and now you can spend a few hours at
Yeah.
the
You got your quarters. Yeah.
free.
It's like you're right. We were resourceful because one, I would mow the lawn and make 50 cents or whatever from my dad, right? And then maybe you'd mow your neighbor's lawn and maybe they'd give you 50 cents.
Yeah.
And then you take bottles, right? Like I remember even before aluminum recycling, it was the bottles, right? You had your Coke bottles and you'd go pick them up and you could take them back and get 5 cents for
Yeah.
that. And then when aluminum recycling came in later, that was the other thing. You could get 5 cents for aluminum cans. And yeah, you'd get a couple dollars worth of quarters and go to the arcade or buy some candy
Yeah.
all on your own. Like I
Right.
remember like as an 8-year old driving to the dime store and with my own money buying candy, going through the checkout, paying the lady and always getting screwed by taxes, right? Like the candy's 5 cents, but then when you buy five of them, there's 2 cents tax. And it's like
Yeah.
I only got a quarter, so you had to put one back. And right,
Yeah.
it's like you learned about taxes, right,
Yeah.
when you were a kid because you're like, crap, the candy has a 2 cents tax when you go over 50 cents or whatever it was, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um,
True.
and but that you're right. There was independence in all of that because you learned it on your own,
Yeah.
and there was a freedom to that to feel like I'm in control of my destiny for the day,
Right.
right? Which means imagination. How
Right.
can we do this? How can we do that? What if we went here? What if we did that? These are all the types of questions. It wasn't like we have to plan something. You and I joke about this all the time. It's like for us to get together, our families to get together, it's like, well, you check your girl's schedule and I'll check my son's soccer schedule. And then my wife has the company Christmas party
Yeah.
and we'll see you in 2028. Right.
Right.
Like, but back then it was like you just rode your bike over to your friend's house, threw your bike in the yard, knocked on their screen door and
Yeah,
said, "Can Rich come out and play?" That
exactly.
was it. And if he couldn't, you're like, oh, well, I guess I'll go to Todd's house, right? Or whatever. It's like you go to somebody else's house and see if they were ready to play.
And how much were your parents involved in entertaining you and all of that during that time? Zero.
Zero. So, in fact, my dad he was classic at this because you'd say, like all kids say, I'm bored. What can I do? Right? We're bored. What can we do? My dad had standing answers to that.
Yeah.
And maybe I get a little bit of my sarcastic sense of humor. No, I get all of my sarcastic sense of humor from my dad, who would say, "Why don't you go play on the yellow line?" Now, if you don't know what that means, that's the line down the middle of the street. And my dad was telling me to go play in the middle of the street, right? Um, the other one was he would say to play tiddlywinks with manhole covers.
Oh,
And
geez.
I like as a kid, I never knew what that meant, but tiddlywinks are these little plastic discs, and you push down on them and they flip up into the air.
Yeah.
And there was different games you could play with tiddlywinks. You might have to Google that. But so joke was to use a manhole cover as a tiddlywink,
Yeah.
right? That was the second thing to do. And then he had a whole collection of sarcastic things to say when I was bored. Of course, the only thing that my mom would ever say if I said I was bored, why don't you clean your room? That
Oh,
was
right. Right. Fold your clothes, clean your
yeah, nope, that's not what I had in mind. I want to do something fun. Take your
right.
bikes and go to the park or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, that's what we do, or the lake, or the
Yeah.
creek,
Yeah.
right?
It was just a wonderful time to be a child because you were completely free. Your imagination, the world was yours. You could imagine, you were resourceful. You could have as much fun as you could pack into
Yeah,
12 hours or 10
yeah.
hours.
And it
Um,
didn't matter if you got dirty. It didn't
no,
matter if you scraped your knee or
no.
whatever. It just didn't matter. Those kind of things just didn't matter.
Well, that brings me to the second get off my lawn.
Ah, yes.
And this is something I think you'll identify with because it was really brought to my attention this over Thanksgiving break. So here we've been noticing that every stop light has somebody that's homeless that's begging for money, right?
Uh,
They're sign and there we know that there are homeless people that need help. We know that, we're not trying to be too harsh here in recognizing that. My pet peeve has to do with whenever we drive to California or drive back, we always seem to be running low on gas around Quartzsite or Blythe.
yeah.
And I have never been able to make it there, pump the gas without somebody coming up to me and saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
man, I need some money for gas. Every single time I've gone, and it puts you in such a awful situation because
Yeah.
here again, just like it's want my windows open. Here, I just want to pump my gas.
Yeah.
I go, and here now I feel like I've got to be the bad guy if I'm not going to reach into my wallet and pull out cash and say, "There you go." I've got to be the bad guy. I'm put in a position of feeling awful and bad by saying, "No,
Yeah.
no," Um, not to mention being approached when you're
Yeah. I don't like that.
kind of
Uh,
also, it's
it's a
kind of
little
off,
off-putting. And
but
what's interesting about that too is like I don't ever even carry cash. So it's like I literally there's nothing I can do in that circumstance. It's like I don't have cash,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's like if you really need food or gas or something, I think if I went over there and parked and watched you for the next hour, I'm pretty sure that this is a scam.
Yeah,
And in most cases, I think that it is a scam,
yeah.
right?
And
Um,
is there probably is homeless people that really need help or could use it. And because now you have all of these others that have kind of poured in and are treating it like a side gig for them. It's jaded. At least me, I can say I'm.
yeah,
Uh,
it does. It makes you jaded, right?
it,
Because as soon as people start taking advantage of something, then it's like, okay, now I don't want to do anything with that again because it's nonsense. I know that this is a scam or that you're
yeah,
trying to manipulate me. I I have very like big spidey sense when anything like that comes up. And um, it's like it's interesting though, because back in the day, like even when I was a kid and my dad and I ran out of gas several times. I don't know why my dad was always running out of gas, but several times we'd hitchhike to a gas station. My
yeah,
dad and his 5-year-old son hitchhiked to a gas station. Can you imagine doing that now with your kid? Just getting in a stranger's car and having him taken to the, I mean, no way, not in a
yeah,
million years would you do that, nor would you pick somebody up,
yeah,
even if they had a kid with them, because you'd feel like, oh, that kid's a plant, right? It's probably a little person who's dressed up like to
Yeah.
scam me somehow. That's sad, right? It's like, but that's, and I think like we're the generation too where we went from kind of trusting people
Yeah.
to seeing all of the scams.
Right.
And so we're hip to that. And now we just don't want to have anything to do with it because we have common sense.
Right.
And so our common sense says, nope, this is a scam.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with a lot of things, right?
And it just puts you in a position that it's like a checkmate thing where, you're in
Yeah,
this
yeah,
now. Okay, I'm getting approached. What's the right thing to do here? Because, you work really hard for your money. You don't want to be just handing it out. You would like to help people in need. How do we separate
yeah.
really in need? And it's very, very, it's a
It's
blip.
tricky.
Yeah.
It's tricky. And what I usually tell people too is like rather than even giving to a big organization that gives very little to the actual thing that they're supporting, there's a lot of organizations like
Yeah.
that, charities who are essentially scams. They're money laundering
Yeah.
scams. Like most of them are. Even well-known ones are 80% scam,
Wow.
right? Because a small percentage actually goes to people. By the way, I don't know if everyone knows this, but you can look up any charity and they have to report the percentage that goes to the specific cause and then what else is used for administration costs. And my recommendation is before you ever give to any of organization, Red Cross, even anything, look that up,
Right.
right? Look
Yeah.
that up because it's critical. A
Yeah.
better way to do it is to know somebody personally in need and to give it to them.
Yeah.
And in most cases, just do it anonymously, right? Like just slip an envelope into their mailbox or whatever. Send them a gift card anonymously.
Right.
It's an easy way to do it, and then you know that it's actually going to do somebody some good,
Yeah.
and you'll feel great about it too, especially if you do it anonymously, because there's just that ability to see them prosper with that gift or whatever it might be and feel blessed and it's just something that feels good in your
Yeah.
heart. It's a way better feeling than doing a credit card transaction with some organization that you don't know much about, but they put up a barcode on TV, so you decided to donate $1 to it or whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a better way. There are better ways to do that. Hey, I've got our next segment is entitled the X post of the week. And X is for those of us what Twitter used to be called. And I'm not saying that it always has to come from X/Twitter, but when we find a very interesting post between Brady and I, we will share that post and perhaps discuss it. And this is the one that I found a week ago. I don't know if it's big enough for you to read, but I'll read it for you. This was posted uh, on X, and it reads: Did parents in the '80s really allow their kids to roam freely, or is that just a portrayal seen in movies? That's their question, and it was actually really fascinating. You can see how many comments there are. 16 when I took the screen cap, there was 16,000
Wow.
comments
Yeah.
to that post, but I found it really funny that somebody actually asked that question. So
Yeah.
here to the poster of that X, I will tell you, thank you for posting that. It is my X post of the week. And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
most decidedly, yes, they allowed kids to roam freely in the 70s and 80s. Speaking from both of our experiences that we've talked about
Right.
on this show, it's like we had a tremendous amount of freedom to go wherever we wanted. Every once in a while, there would be limits in terms of maybe distance or crossing an interstate or something like that, but rarely. And if you grew up in a rural area, there was literally nothing.
Yeah.
There was, be home in time for dinner kind of stuff. But they're just playing on railroad tracks. Yep, all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Making jumps in the middle of the street and jumping your bike over them. Yep. you know, just constantly doing stuff, roaming free,
Yeah,
literally just going around neighborhoods, stopping to see kids, grabbing two more kids, playing football in somebody's yard,
absolutely.
drinking out of a hose,
Yeah,
right? All of that stuff. That is not just a movie trope. That's how life really was. It really
wonderful.
is. And especially if you see like the flashback movies even get it pretty well to Stranger Things and stuff where the kids just get on their bikes and in the
Yeah,
middle of the night and drive their bikes down a dark street. It's like you'd be like, what kind of crazy parents would have let their kids do that? It's like every parent let their kids do
yeah.
stuff like that. It wasn't crazy parents,
No,
normal parents,
would
right?
be a lot, I think, these days. Yeah,
We'd be
it-
in jail. Like I'd tease my mom. I'm like, they'd throw you in jail now, like for being a negligent parent, right?
right.
And
Yeah,
I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I'm saying it's like that's how dumb we've become that you can't
yeah,
give your kids any freedom, right?
yeah. Really
And I try
different.
to think to myself when my son wants to go someplace after school with the car and just say, I feel I have to say yes because I want him to experience that level. I can just go someplace,
Right.
right? I still like to be asked and all of that, but it's like having just the freedom to go do something on your own
Yeah,
is it's a remarkable experience. I think for me, and I think probably for you, it is the defining characteristic of Gen X people
yeah.
is
It's
that childhood freedom, right?
yeah, yeah. It's kind of sad that it's no longer, for all these younger generations to be able to experience that. But
And I don't, and the sad thing about it too is I don't ever see it coming back. I
no,
think once down the dark path, it's going to dominate our destiny, right?
yeah,
To quote a famous movie person.
yeah,
It's just once that happens, it's very hard to undo it.
right,
Um,
right.
and it's up to Gen X parents to allow their kids a little bit more freedom than maybe some of the younger parents do, the helicopter parents and all of that. Find ways to give your kids moments of freedom
You're
where
right.
they can just do stuff, right?
Yeah, develop. Yeah, into themselves for
And
sure.
sure you worry about them and stuff, but at the same time, it's like let them know that your desire is for them to have fun and to
Right.
maybe learn their own boundaries and to learn how to stay out of difficult situations and bad situations, by experiencing it, not
Right.
always just being told it,
Yeah.
right? I think that's important. So that post struck me as being really funny, and it struck a chord with 16,300 other people who decided to comment, and I'm sure they were all Gen Xers like me.
Yeah.
Like, what the heck are you talking about? Of course, we were allowed to roam free in the 80s. That was what made it a great time period, right?
Yeah.
It just
Absolutely.
was. And in fact, I think like there was a there was a moment in time too where the threat of nuclear war with Russia and the Cold War and all that stuff kind of dampened some of the cultural spirit of the late 70s and even into the early 80s. But by Reagan's second administration, that was even fading. And you
Mm.
could see the handwriting was on the wall, right? Russia and the Cold War was going to go away.
Yeah.
And it was only 5 6 years later by the end of the 80s that it was done with. And we had that time period where that was the one worry, but most of the things we didn't worry about.
Yeah.
And we had that freedom, and that was I would say that was pretty much a universal experience for kids, especially who grew up in the 70s and 80s, right?
Yeah.
um, and that no successive generation has experienced it at that level at all
No. No.
anymore. And it's like, well, you want to be careful and there's lots of bad things out there. There is, and there was back then too, but you figure it out, right? And, if a guy pulls up in a van and offers you candy, like you learn that guy's probably creepy
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
probably stay away from him. And you tell your other friends, hey, if a guy in a green van with no windows pulls up, like, I think he was creepy, right? So maybe don't.
Put candy on the ground and roll away slowly.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right. Or just push Teddy in front and grab the candy and run, right? Like that would have been our thing.
Uh,
So anyway, that's my X post of the week. We'll try to find something each time to have some fun with there.
yeah.
All right. I think that we are about at the end of our podcast, and thank you for joining us for the pilot. Like we said, we will be probably doing one about once a week. If something special comes up, we may do some special episodes. We're going to be available mainly on Spotify is the best place, but we will be on YouTube. You can see the videos on Spotify and YouTube. We'll post them to Amazon Music. They'll be on iHeartRadio, and we have a Twitter site. So we will be posting all of those there. We would really love it if you follow and share episodes and the podcast itself with friends and family and anybody you know who is a Gen Xer. But I think maybe some millennials might understand a few things that we're talking about. And if you're a Gen Y or a Gen Z, you'll get a kick out of listening to people talk about really strange things that you have no idea
Yeah.
what they are. So remember to hit subscribe and like for all that and share. And I also wanted to mention, Brady, we are going to be on UHF channel 75.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that is there's head to Google for that one to see whatever that is, right? Like if you
Yeah.
if you turn your antennas to the northeast, you can pick up UHF channel 75. I think the main dial has to be on 13
Oh
for
man.
it to go to the net. I can't remember how that all worked, but anyway, so for Brady and myself, we thank you for tuning in. And because we're Gen X, we want you to have fun, but we want you to be home before the street lights come on.
Absolutely.
That's our recommendation to you. All right, we'll see you next time.
Take care, guys.